Moving on to the employee clock card. So every night after the day has finished, TMS will take the clockings for every employee and it will compare it to the shift that it was expecting them to work. At the moment, we're at the beginning of the week, so the 22nd doesn't have a work record yet, but if we were to look at this tomorrow, we would see a work record for this employee. Just moving back to last week, we can see our test employee, Eric employee, hasn't been clocking in every day, so there's absences inserted everywhere. However, if we use somebody that has been clocking in, I think this is a good example of somebody. Here we can see last week the comings and the goings and the hours that TMS works out based on the comings and the goings and any roundings that are applied for payroll purposes, etc. And we'll find per line what's happened every day. So Monday the 15th, we don't have any clockings for Paulis. And well, maybe they weren't clocking on that day, maybe they were here, maybe they weren't. Should an employee not clock on a day, they're usually absent for a reason, and that reason hasn't been planned in advance. So the way that we would deal with this from the perspective of an anomaly is if the employee was absent, we would change the absence code to the relevant code. P just stands for pending, it's waiting for your input. Maybe that employee was sick, for example. We can go and look for our sickness code, and we can say they were sick. Hit submit. There we go. It's not highlighted red anymore. It's been dealt with. And in general, you're going to deal with all of your anomalies in one go. You're not going to have to come into each employee and look at the anomalous records. That's just an example of what might happen. If I want to undo anything I've done, I can come in here and click recalculate. And I'll just undo my manual changes and look at any clockings that were on the day. So we've got a number of hours codes: basic, overtime at 1.5, overtime at double time, additional hours. So this would be considered unpaid overtime. We've got a reason field where, should you want to add any notes as to the reason for an absence, for example, you can put in some free text in there. We've also got the ability to drag and drop hours codes around here. So maybe the employee wasn't actually absent for whatever reason, they couldn't clock in and out on that day, but they were here all day, and maybe I just want to pay them for it anyway. I can drag these 8 hours over to the basic column, dump them there, and there we go, that's dealt with. Once again, undo by recalculating. And I can do that with the hours codes between them. Notice if somebody's got an overtime hours code that's populated, it will highlight it as red because it does require you to approve it. If I wanted to approve it on this screen, I can just click the checkbox and that's approved. Additionally, I can click on the hours code and change the value should I need to, or select from the list, which does exactly the same thing as dragging and dropping. Or I could delete it. So you've got quite a lot of power where TMS has worked out the hours and you believe it needs to be something else, or you've agreed something specifically with the employee. You can come and amend the hours. You can even click on an hours column and add in the hours manually where needed. If you need to drill down a little bit further into the details of these records, you can click on the edit box. So you'll only ever be able to see the employees that you were working. Summary of any worked hours, where you can add in additional worked hours should you want to. Absence hours if they're on the record, times of the clockings, and hours bands. And this is a chronological breakdown of the day based on the clocking times that they've had, and all of the shifts where they've got a half-hour unpaid break, which is just assumed. You'll find that inserts itself somewhere in the middle of the day. You'll notice some options down the left. If maybe I want to get this day to recalculate based on some random shift parameters that don't exist from the drop-down list of shifts, I can always modify the details of it if I have sufficient access levels, but you guys as line managers don't, so I'm going to ignore that bit and go back. That's one just for Natalie and Darren to play with. So we've got a drop-down. This allows. So there's our clock card. You'll find at the bottom there's reconciliation results, and that depends on the amount of basic hours somebody's meant to do every week, whereas if they've then got some overtime worked, TMS will start clawing back that overtime until they've delivered on their basic hours they're meant to work every week. some examples of that we might be able to find in our friend Eric employee. I guess not in this instance. Back to our real employee. Here's an interesting one that came up earlier. When employees are clocking in and out, they're meant to state whether they're clocking in or clocking out. Clocking in being the button above the big round button on the clock, and out being the button below the big round button on the clock. Red stands for out. What we can see here is this employee clocked out when they came in and out when they left. Two outs don't make a right. So you'll find TMS raises a misclocking anomaly, and it is important that employees do state whether they're coming or going, when they're coming or going, because you have a fire alarm interface which is hooked into our clocking terminals. So if somebody clocks themselves out when they're actually coming in, the report that has been sent and printed, etc., is then going to be wrong. Should you notice this, have a conversation with said employee to say, please clock in when you're coming in. We can change it quite easily by clicking on the clocking here and changing that out to an in. But the important thing is people clock in and out correctly on the days when they're coming and going, because if a fire alarm occurs, we need those lists to be right.